So good evening everyone, welcome to the Pentart YouTube live for today. Whilst I just wait for a few people to come online, let me just share some bits and pieces to my feeds. And then I can pay attention. There we are, that's cool. Let's open that, continue that. Let's make sure we don't have extraneous sound. And then let's pop that phone over there, out the way. Yeah. Don't want to go onto there. Come on, flick round. There we are. Oh, excellent. I do like it when a plan comes together. There we are. That will do, that will do, that will do. So, let's just pop that onto there. Oh, there we go. Good evening, Isabel. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's always much appreciated. So, I think I'm not going to be speaking out of turn, and I apologise to Pentart in advance if I am. Pentart are going to be changing what they're doing again and moving their lives to Wednesday nights every week, as opposed to having multiple through the week. I think it's so that way all of the lives will be held always on the same day rather than everywhere else, and can be accessed at any time whatsoever, and they will become more seasonally themed and less random, which for me means that I will be doing lives for Pentart but less frequently than the one a week that I have been doing for a while. So I consider that a win for me. It gives me a bit more time to do things. So I am working with half of an acrylic egg. You could do this with any size acrylic egg. And I've got a little pot because I'm intending standing my egg in the pot long term. And we're going to do something that's different. So I have done some prep on another half egg, just because things sometimes need some time for drying. Now this is acrylic, and acrylic, as we know, is a non-porous medium, and so I have chosen my primer of choice for non-porous surfaces, which is bonding primer. And this primer you need to put on in plenty of time. So you put a layer on, it will be white. Let this first layer dry. I have another half egg already prepared. Let it dry, smooth it out because you will see the lumps if you're not. Pop it on with a sponge if that's easier for 24 hours. And then put a second layer on and let it dry. And then your surface will be stable and other mediums will attach to it. So I'm going to paint the inside. So that's step one, and then just let it dry. And then I wanted some texture on the outside of my egg. And I have chosen fiber paste for my texture, but you could use a stone paste. I just want something that's going to give me a little bit of a texture feel, and of course having put the wet inside, and then we're just going to take that and cover the outside in a layer of this. So I'm going to have a rough feel, a bit like, you know, a plastered wall from our outside, and this will adhere to that surface. It's the unprimed surface without any problems, and will stay in place quite happily. And you don't need a thick layer, you just need to get a nice layer covered over everything. There we are. And then it needs to dry before you can do anything. Now you can, if you want, colour your fibre paste quite happily with pigment paste. So if you want this, is your egg to be pink or purple or whatever colour you want, then if you take the pigment paste and add just a tiny amount into your paste, then you can colour it whatever colour you want. So it comes as a white paste, but you can either paint over it or mix colour into it, making it a very versatile product to have. I'm going to ignore the fact that I'm going to have sticky hands from inside. As I say, I would let the inside dry properly before doing this, but these must, I don't need 20 halves ready at this stage. So you can see that just a little bit, and you can smooth it out as much as you possible. I quite like a bit of texture. As I say, I don't want it, don't particularly want it to be completely smooth. And the fibre paste comes in these 150ml pots. You can also get it in 500ml pots. So if you're going to do a huge piece or do some fibre art, then the big pot might be really quite useful. And if you're only going to do smaller amounts, then the little one will work. So we can just give ourselves a nice layer covering over what we want and making sure that we don't have any gaps in the process. And that then gives us a base and a texture for the outside of our acrylic egg. Because of what I want to do for the inside, that's why I've used an acrylic egg, but you could equally use your fibre paste on a polystyrene egg just as easily. Let me just wipe that off, pop that there, and I am then going to take you one step forward from where I was, and I'll come back to the base later on. So I have chosen some Stamperia molds that have been around for a little while. They came out last year. I think they come from Farrell's collections. So we have a door mold, and I love doors in all their forms, and these are really quite small and sensible. And I have some clay. Now you could use Jovi clay. I have some air dry paper clay. So use whichever clay you want, and I'm deliberately doing this for these rather than using resin, because I want to shape them round. So I'm just going to pull off a piece of that clay, and then I'm going to squazzle it, squazzle being a technical word of course, into my mould and give it a good push down, because that's way it's going to allow me to shape it. Now if you're going to do this with resin, which you could use the rapid resin, because you can demold that relatively quickly whilst it's flexible, you can shape with that, but for this purpose I'm going to use the air dry clay. So there we are, and then always just pull your clay just ever so slightly away from the sides. It will just make taking it out easier. Flex and pull. That piece is now going to sit and can dry, and shape it around gently into there, in place, preferably round the right way. And there are some little light bulbs which I've lamps which I've also got out, but that's the process. And then I wanted to add some greenery for along the sides of this, so I'm going to repeat that process in this mold that has sort of lots of different pieces of greenery. Now this one, there's a a mould that comes with House of Roses that has other leaves as well. So choose whichever you want. But I just wanted basically a string or a length of leaf. You could add each one separately as you wanted to, but then I can pick this up and it will stick onto that clay, and just pop it onto the side and then just shape it gently into place. So curve it round. There we are. And we're going to repeat for the other side. Hello, Juliana. Thank you for watching, my darling. So this is just, yes, it does require a little bit of thinking, a little bit of drying, but it's quite a nice way of creating a bespoke diorama for any time of year, really. You could use, you could use a heart, you could use a bauble, but I just thought I would do an Easter themed one, because Easter is in 3 or 4 weeks' time, possibly. So posh it in, squish it in, and you could use other leaves if you want to. You can add in at any other stage that you want. And I've got a bit more clay there, so I'm just going to squash off some of that and then refill so that I get the edge definition that I want. There's still a bit more clay there than I need. Let's just take that out, pop that in. Here we are. I'm going to say this, if you pull it away, there we are, that can go there. I can pop this up, pop that onto there quite happily. I know I've got a gap in the top. I could put a bow, but equally I can put a little single leaf into there. Same principle. And in this mould there are some little leaves. So let's just pick that one because it's a nice shape. So choose whichever ones you want. And of course this could be managed with lots of different moulds. Quite happily. And that can tuck its way into there, pop down. So I have my leaves and my base. Okay, so that is the preparation that I have pre-done. Now if you're using your air dry plate, do make sure that you wrap it up properly. I tend to stick in a baby wipe, wrap it all up, grab a Ziploc bag, throw it into my Ziploc bag and add another couple of baby wipes. Could be wet towel. I don't leave it the wet in direct contact, and then squash out as much of that air as possible so it doesn't go dry, and that can now go out of the way. Okay, and then that just needs to be put out of the way, out of harm's way, and left to dry. And then we'll tidy up. So that is one side of our egg prepared, and as I say, I have one already done. So I have cast from the family collection from Stamperia 3 little mice. I'm not going to use that wind, I've changed my mind. A little birdie and some florals. There we are. And these have been cast from rapid resin, and so I could just paint them directly, but I prefer to gesso my pieces. So let me just grab a brush. Doesn't have to be a very nice brush. There we are. And then let's just gesso our little rabbits, little mice, because we're going to make a little home for our mice, an Easter home for our mice. Why not? There we are. And we've got a few florals as well, because why not? Why not? There we are. Because you can't have a home without a garden, without some flowers, can you? Of course you can't. Of course you cannot. There we are. Let's just cover these. We can set these to dry. So these have come from the Easter mould, or one of the lavender moulds from last year, the other year, of the florals. But little florals, choose whichever mould you feel fit to use. 2 little lamps to go on the outside, because why not? Okay. So that can go onto there. And I'm going to be naughty. I have used that white gesso as a paint as well. Now I could have used bonding primer on those because they are plastic, but the gesso will dry quickly, whereas the bonding primer, you need 2 coats, preferably 12, minimum of 12 and preferably 24 hours apart. So hence the decision to use something a little bit different. So, in good old-fashioned BP to sell, this piece is now dry. And because these are clay, this one's actually resin, but the rest of it is clay, and the fibre paste is absorbent if you don't do anything about it, I am actually going to varnish this little lot with, she says, the varnish that she's thrown on the floor. So Decor Soft Varnish in Matte. Okay, and I'm not going to use a new brush, brand new brush. Okay, so we're just going to give this a little coat. All over. Because that's going to help paints and things sit on the top rather than soaking in, and it's also going to stop my castings, the clay, becoming too soft and squidgy, for want of a better term. So there we are. So that is the piece that I pre-did and dried ahead of going live tonight. Okay, so that can sit there for a minute. I want a stand to put my pot in. You could use a candle holder. They're quite difficult to find in the UK. I think they're easier to find in parts of Europe than they are in the UK. So this is just a bit of a wooden pot, but use whatever you have. You could take a toilet roll would work, wrap it in some fabric with the fabric hardener just to make a little stand. That would also work. So and this is the Stone Effect paste, so that it doesn't look like, which is going to mean it doesn't look quite so wood-like. And this is limestone, which is obviously white. And you can get this in all sorts of different colours. It's just a thick textured paste designed to mimic different surfaces. And I've just engaged my brain and remembered that I actually, having thrown my clay out of the way, I'm going to need it, because that wasn't very intelligent, was it? So I'm just going to cover this, cover the edges. So be creative, use what you have. This was good. I have these sitting on the side. They're quite small, like nice little gift box trinkets, but that's not quite what I wanted. So you can use, as I say, what you have. make something that you can sit your egg ultimately into. You will have the usual hijinks ultimately, because we're going to need to be able to make in 3D and assemble with it vertically. But hey ho, so just carry on, and if necessary add more than one layer. This is a stone effect finish, so again it doesn't have to be entirely smooth. In fact, you could argue that the more rough it is, the more natural it might be. There we are. So I'll pop that onto there. So we're using a veritable mix of different products from Pentart tonight. Let me just grab. So one of the headaches, of course, when using an acrylic piece is that if you put a heat gun to it too long, as Priscilla said last week, you will end up with it warping. So you do need to be careful, but I do need to have these steps dried. So I am going to be moderately careful as I put my heat gun around this, and I'm hoping that the clay and the fibre paste will protect my plastic shape and stop it from warping. We can but live in optimism. But we'll do these gently as we go. Now I am very much aware that some of these pastes will be surface dried but still tacky, and that's also fine. This is going to allow me to push and texturise these as I go. And at the same time, it's meaning I'm not going to have the heat gun on my plastic for too long. And I can, when my moulded pieces are dry, I will be able to I'm just using my finger as this becomes slightly more tacky to smooth the texture out a little bit. Working quite nicely. And that can sit and dry. Those can come over here. Going to need a little bit more heat, but not too much in any one place, just to get that dry along the way. Getting there. Right, so let's get these little mice who are now paint dry and those other pieces, and give our hands a jolly good clean, because why not? Why not? Because trying to do things with sticky tacky fingers is never a good look, I find. There we are. There we are. Right, let us grab a collection of paints, of which I have my usual multitude of Sims out here. Because why wouldn't I? So I have a mixture of acrylic paints, a medium mist ink, some chalky paints. So I'm going to pop my bottom down because then I will be able to stabilise my hands, pick out some smaller brushes. I'm going to pop that temporarily onto the floor in front of my fan heater, which is the noise in the background, because of course when I decided to go, just as I went live this evening, the heavens decided to open and the room became quite cold. So what colour are mice? Well, I think mice are various shades of brown stroke grey. So So what we've got that was Decor Paint Chalky in ivory, and this is acrylic paint matte in vintage grey. So let's just, and we have some compact powder, because why would we not have compact powder, which is a soft skin tone. So let's just have a little bit of a play. I'm going to take some of that grey and some of that ivory and soften it down so I've got a custom colour. There we are. That will work quite nicely. So it's a softened colour, and I've added a yellow undertone to there. So let's just take our little mouse and add a little bit of pink there, and just a little bit onto the end of the nose and onto her hand. And then we're going to pick up some of that grey colour that I've just mixed, and just paint in a little grey mouse. And I'm going to have no shoes on this little one, just a little. Now let's do the same for this bigger one. A little bit on the inside, a little bit for the snout, and then let's just pick up this softer colour for the hand, which is sitting there. We've got the head, of course. There we are, and soften that nose in. There we are. There we are. You can add as much detail or as little detail to your moulded pieces as you want, really, can't you? There we are. So we'll do that, and then we might get out that little heat gun again. Let's have little pink hands. And little pink hands there, and she's got shoes on her feet, so that's cool. And then they're custom coloured for the rest of the fur. I'm just going to take a little bit and give them a bit more of a pinky nose. There we are. I think that will work quite nicely. Okay. So let me just give my brush a little bit of a wash, and let's find a little wipe. There we are, for my things. So my little lamps, I'm going to add a little bit of that ivory for the centre. Could pick up an orange, or a yellow, but the ivory is going to work quite nicely. I'm going to let that dry, and then I can decorate the rest of it separately. Okay. Now then. Okay. So now we need to think about what we're going to do for the rest of our things. So the reason I'm going for, okay, so this is Mallow in an acrylic paint matte, and I also have Pastel Violet, these are colours you don't see me using very often, and Light Purple. There we are. I don't know about you, but in the UK we have beautiful purple crocuses at this time of the year. So let's just take our florals. These aren't crocuses, but they will work just as well. The primer is not completely dry, and that's fine, so I can just add, and that means that these will blend quite nicely into each other. Colours in nature are gentle, aren't they? There we are. Just need to thin that paint down just a little bit. It's quite thick. There we are, but as I say, that's partly because it's not, these are colours that I do not use very often. You'd be delighted to know I have put in an order to Pentarp, and I will have a whole new collection of not thick paint arriving. But in the meantime, we're going to use what we have, because that just seems to me to make complete sense. There we are. I'm just going to let these dry a little bit. I don't particularly want to have daisies. They're much more a summer flower for the UK. There we are. So we'll just have these in assortment of those pretty pinks and the purples. And I want to soften that look a little bit. Now I could let these dry and then soften with some white gesso, but equally I can, whilst that paint is wet, I can just take off the surface. So I've got in effect the same look, but with a step less drying. There we are. And it will soften the effect, because my wiping is going to take off the surface, not every which way. It's quite a useful trick. This is paint and wipe back. Do you need clean surface for wiping back? There we are. So those can now sit and dry, but we're going to need some green for that leaf that's on that part. So let's just pick up. So that is vintage green. So I'm keeping to a colour palette that is reasonably muted and soft. Okay. There we are. So those florals can now sit out of harm's way. Possibly, maybe. Right. So let us give our little female a little purple blouse. Pale purple, that light purple. Blouse underneath. And let's go for a magenta. Little dungaree, or little pinafore, I think is what it actually is. There we are. So we'll just be careful with our painting. There we are. And that's going to need to dry before I can pick up the next bit, but hey ho. All right. Okay. And then let's just take our little girl. We'll go for that ivory, and we're going to paint the petticoat. And if it gets a little bit of that pink into it, it will just all help soften it and bring the colours together. There we are. And we'll do the same for her. Blouse underneath. There we are. We'll pop that there. So she's got, and then let's just take that ordinary purple. So last time when I used these molds, I very specifically went for colours that were matching the papers that I'd used from the colour inspiration from the from the collection, and today we're showing that you can actually paint your molds in any direction that you choose, in any colour theme that you choose. There we are. We're going to give this little one some bright purple shoe, I think. There we are. Because I think a bright purple shoe would look nice. Let's just take that ivory. So we've got some little socks to paint down here. So little lacy bits. And then let's just take that purple and give her some purple shoes. Because little girls don't need to have brown shoes, do they? Of course they don't. Okay, let's take some of that pink. And we're going to have a make-believe bird because we can. Let's take some of that brown, that purple, and add that onto there, and add a little bit for the top. A little bit of ivory into there. And let's just give our bird a softer purple wing, because we're in the land of complete make-believe, so it doesn't matter, does that? Of course it doesn't matter. Right, for Mr. Mouse, because we've got a Mr. Mouse, I do want him to have some brown, and I don't necessarily want him to be the same colours palette, because I'm a bit of a traditionalist. So this is vintage blue, she says. Let's give our little man some blue dungarees, because that's what you have, isn't it? Yeah, of course it is. There we are. We'll have some blue dungarees, denim blue, country blue. It could be bright blue, but as I haven't chosen a bright base for any of my things, we're going to stick to these more muted colours, because for me they're going to work better. And the other reason will become clear with the fullness of time. Right, let's just roll that, get rid of the excess. Let's do that patch and the other strap. Preferably without giving him a dirty nose. And you can have a white top, which then saves me having to paint him, she says, which is very lazy, but it's going to work. And let's just have a little bit of blue, and this will be Falcon blue, Falcon brown. And there's way too much there, but that's okay. We will use that. So for my vast quantity of paints and products, and we will pick up, I'm going to give him some brown shoes, because why not? There we are. Let's just pop those. Let's give our birdie some brown feet. I think it might work a little bit better. There we are. So our leaves are done, our little mice are done, and to just grab a little needle, there we are. Oops, she says, pop that underneath there. Cool. So we've got our little mice. They need to dry. And I just need a tiny, tiny bit of black for my little lamps. So these will prove slightly challenging. So we're just going to have solid black tops, because why not? comes it. There we are. Right. And because I was stingy, we're going to need, oh, now we've got about 20 times more than we need, but hey ho. Let's just paint the top of these. So obviously you can spend as much time as you want painting them, but we don't require to be here until tomorrow night. Well, I don't. You might, but I definitely don't. So I'm just tickling the surface of these so that I've got a layer of paint on the tops, so it looks like they might vaguely be black with some white inside. There we are. Cool. Not bad. So that can go there. Now with a bit of luck, we now have sort of dry. So let's come back to these. Is it dry? It's not fully dry, but that's okay. That's okay. So let's just take some of that green and then let's just pop it on to our greenery. If we get greenery on the eggshell, then to me that's going to look like a bit of moss might have formed. But let your own imagination take you where you want it to. There we are. We are making reasonable progress. It's a blessing, isn't it? We're going to keep our painting relatively simple. I'm not going to try doing masses of individual painting of leaves because, quite frankly, we might be here forever and a month of Sundays. Now, this is my dry clay, which is why I did this piece earlier, so that I had a piece that was dry. Because it was going to make my life easier for holding and for painting. There we are. So our leaves have now been, on one side have been painted. And then let's just do that little white back to add the variation. There we are. So we can see we've got lots of detail then in that mould, but we haven't had to do anything fancy, anything clever, and we haven't had to do lots of underlayering and overlaying or antiquing tonight. Not that I don't love doing that, because I absolutely do, but sometimes you just have to think about different ways and different ideas for doing things. Yeah. And the key for wiping back is obviously not to let the paint dry fully before you do so, because once it's dried, and no amount of spraying water on dry paint will rehydrate it. It's a very effective way of doing things. Sorry, that's my phone beeping at me. I wonder if that's my friendly PT reminding me that I've got a training session tomorrow. I know, I'm a glutton for punishment. There we are. So let's just wipe off that top. So we've got lots of colour, lots of leaves. We can pop that in. What colour door? Let's go for that grey for the brickwork of our door. I might just keep this all very uber simple tonight. I'm rather liking that white back technique. There we are. Got some stone. The stone's got a little bit of moss in it because I've mixed it with the green. It doesn't really matter. There we are. That was grey, wasn't it? There we are. I'm going to need a bit more of that vintage grey. There's no question about it. We have not got enough out, so there we are. We'll just pop that there. Pop this then. We'll have a grey step. Yeah, let's just wipe back so we can see some of that detail. I might not be able to wipe it back as efficiently, but that's okay. There we are. Just give that a little wipe back. And wash that paint. And what colours? And I'm going to go for a brown door. I'm going to have to be slightly careful wiping that back because obviously, having said that, I'm not actually minded about it coming onto there, onto that brick. It looks quite nice. So we have a brown door. There we are. So the stonework, aka my dried fibre paste, is definitely looking too clean. So I have some white coffee spray, which is clearly green. It's not, is it? There we are. Let's just take, I think this is one that's going to have to go in the bin. So coffee isn't green, but hey ho, we're going to use this and we're just going to muddy this up. There we are. So it's not the same. So you could use whatever spray you've got, or your diluted Lasur will work quite nicely. I'm going to wipe some of that off in a minute. There we are. It's just going to give it a feel that it might have been out, might have had. So I want it a little bit grayer, so let's just add some of the grey into there. Just going to mix it in with the water that's on there, spread it about. So we're just going to add some colour into our brick so it doesn't look so bright white. There we are. Got some areas that are still quite wet. Yep. And then let's just grab a clean wipe again. And we can take off the excess. So I no longer have a white piece. I've got a piece that it looks aged and more appropriate for maybe having been out in the garden for a wee while. So that just needs a little bit of wax adding on to the metalwork. We'll just add a little bit all the way around, just to add that little bit of glamour, because why not? Okay. In a minute, let me put a glue gun in to heat up. Yeah. Okay. Let's just do a little bit so we don't need you. We'll clear up this mess, or some of this. We'll put out some clean paint for dry brushing. Why not? It'd be nice. So we'll clear those decks of all of that dry yucky paint so we can see the wood for the trees. That's better. And my hands are vile now, so let's just give those away white. I'm going to add some dry brushing and some extra colour. So I don't want my base to be as white as it is, even though I've used limestone. So let me just find an appropriate brush for dry brushing and a paper towel. You can't dry brush without a paper towel. It's just not possible. So I've got a fairly cream crackered rough brush here. I've got a little bit of paint. This is not fully dry, so I'm just going to mute down with almost no paint on my brush, just to highlight that texture a little bit more. Ideally, you would let this dry completely before you do that, so you really don't need very much. There we are. Okay, so that can go in there. And then let's just add some dry brushing to our mise. So I'm going to choose ivory to do that. It's just softer than the white. I often will dry brush with white, but sometimes it's too stark a colour choice. So a little bit. These are the natural bristle ball brushes from Stamperia that are available via Pentart. Okay, so I can now add some of that onto the top of there. I might need a bit more, and obviously if it's drier the better. But there we are. So we no longer look nice and clean. We've got a bit of texture. Add a bit more contrast to that with some dry brushing. There we are. Soften those colours in. Dry brushing really does add a lot of detail to your pieces. So let's just take our mise and flick over. So this dress has got lots of bubbles in it. There's lots of texture, and this will help define the fur. Yeah, so more texture. Let's highlight that texture, bring it out with that dry brushing. There we are. Let's do the same for our little boy. There we are. There we are. Okay, so that can go in there. Have we got everything? Possibly, maybe. Right. That background is now very boring. Very boring. And this will become evident as to why I picked the colour palette that I did. So let me just pop this out of the way, out of harm's way, onto the floor. So Stamperia have several ranges. They have their new collections, and they also have what they call bestsellers or permanent editions. So this is a rice paper from the permanent collection. It's DFSA 4881. It has lots of florals. There's my glue. So this is my primed piece. And I definitely do not require all of this, but it's going to allow me to add some florals to the back plate, sort of here. So some of this will get hidden, sacrilege maybe. So all I've done is got a little bit of water on a brush to hold that in place. Just going to create myself a background. A little garden. I'm deliberately not going to paint the inside lots of colours. I'm going to keep, not very much of it ultimately will be on show by the time we've added some of these pieces. So let's just take another piece. You can take out what you want from your rice paper. So the water is allowing me to do it, and I'm protecting the piece that I want and pulling away the area I don't want. And then we'll see what we have. I think we might have another floral. Okay, so we've still got water there, so let's just take this piece. The bottom part I know is going to get covered. I have a plan. There we are. Let's just take one more piece. So you can see why I didn't really want to spend ages doing some fancy paint technique on the back, because we're going to piecemeal cover the back to give our little house a floral wallpaper. And I have already got out some glue. So let's just pick up that. This is decoupage glue and varnish matte. Going to have the normal problem of having to get it dry, but hey ho. Okay, so let's just pop that onto there. Curve it into place. That can come over the edge and blend that edge in for me. There we are. I had 3 pieces. I'm sure I had another piece. Where's that gone? Oh dear, oh dear. Right, well, we might be pulling out another piece out of the thing, because it seems to have gone walkabout on my table. It's not difficult, is it, for me to lose stuff? There we are. Pop that over there. Where? How can you lose a piece? Oh, it's really impossible, isn't it? But hey ho. There we are. Never mind. We'll worry about it. Or not, as the case may be. Come on. Let's just pop you into there. Unfold that piece, because it's determined to be a nuisance. There we are. Pop that over there. There we are. And let's just take some of that bright purple paint and give that a little splattering. So to splatter, we're going to add quite a lot of water to that paint, because it's way too thick. Mix it together. Now, pale purple. pick up a brush for splattering with, which for me means a fan brush. Come on, behave. I'm getting paint every which way, all over me. Let's just add some of that, the darker purple, into there. I know, it's horror of horrors, but the paint's already ridiculously thick, so a little bit of extra will not matter. Let's just add some veritable splattering to there. Excellent. Now then, this is when we hope it all comes together. We have all of our components. Aha! And the piece we couldn't find had a lid on it, but hey ho, we'll not bother now. Let's just have a little tidy down. Okay. So we have, I will definitely come back in and add some more green into a little bit of glue. And at this point you could use some tin foil, you could use clay, you could really pretty much use whatever you want, or you could even use a piece of styrofoam or floral foam. The choice is entirely yours. So I'm just going to squodge some clay, because that's what I've got to hand, into there. Okay, cokey. And then I'm going to carve out a hole and sit my house down. Okay. Where's my clay gone? Remember, as I say, you could use a piece of styrofoam at this point. The choice is yours. Okay, and I'm just going to fill in here. Take that down and over. So I'm creating myself a little shelf inside my egg. You need something that you can manipulate, but is soft and will allow you to add extra stuff to it as you want. Okay, and I will decorate the front and the back. Ultimately, I want just a bit more of a layer there, so let me just add that in. Squash it all together. Okay. Cool. So we're now going to create a little garden. So I've got lots of faux greenery here. And I'm just going to pop out on my desk some heavy body gel mat. Okay. So let's start making our garden. We've got, so that will go into there. I've got lots, well, I did have lots of those. And then we can add in all sorts of other greenery. Just going to fill this up to our heart's content, really, with the bits that we've got. And there we are. By dunking it into my heavy body gel as we go, we can help get it to stick in place. So we're just creating a little bit of a garden. If that makes any sense to... Oh, she says, I don't want that on there. There we are. So just assorted greenery from the florist, all chopped up into pieces. Just shove it into place. Create yourself a base. So now I can pop Mr. Rabbit there. I'm going to put little Miss Rabbit into there. So they need a piece, some glue into there. And I can see gaps, and that's fine. So we're just going to grab some natural moss. And we're just going to put some of that onto there. And we're going to fill those gaps in just with our natural moss. So our little creatures look like they are there. Let me just see if my hot glue gun is going to behave this evening. It might do. That's always a blessing, because that's going to make life easier. Come on. So let's just pop some hot glue across there. And obviously, long term, I will go around and decorate the whole piece. There we are. I'll shove that under there. Shove that under there. Little miss, it can then sit there. So I need to fill in some of this gap. So what have we got? We've got some pretty florals. We don't need that piece. And we've got our little flowers. So that's just going to have a bit of gel media to squish into there. So we'll have a little bit of a floral feel coming into there. A little boy sitting there. Sometimes it's easier to pop pieces on whilst things are accessible before you start adding lots of different pieces in. There we are. Let's just add some more of this greenery in, and that's why I've used the clay, but why foam would equally work for you. There we are. Can go there. I can go there. So we're going to have a little garden. Let's just pop our extra mouse into there. Let's pop that clay back in his bag before it becomes cream crackered. Okay, so we've got an area here, so let's just tuck in. Looks too big, but let's just pop a little flower. We're going to do some of that afterwards when I've done the other side. So let's just carry on and get that bit covered, and then I can add in the flowers long term. So there we are. So now we've got that clay hidden. We can carry on. So let's just add some extra bits to poke in and around. You can carry on then doing this to your heart's content. Yeah, so he's going to sit, that one is going to sit on top of that leaf. I'm going to add preferably use your gel medium for this rather than, I'm using the glue because it's going to allow me to add these now. Yeah, but in an ideal world, I really would suggest that you wait and add these. Yeah, let it all dry. There we are. So we've got our little florals, our little mice, our Easter mice. I'm going to go around post live and paint that with the green. Let me just turn that round. Okay. So I have some extra bits here. And again, I'm going to be naughty. I'm going to pop these on with hot glue. But in an ideal world, you would just wait and let it go on with. And then we're just going to take these leaves that we've got left lying around. And put these natural elements into place so that the whole piece then becomes as one all the way around. And I will add some extra moss, she says. There we are. Oh. So let's just add a little bit of moss into there. Add a little bit of moss into here, or a lot as the case may be. There we are. We'll stick that piece in. Let's just turn it round because the piece has all areas and all angles, she says, having glued that to her fingers, which is always not quite what the intention is. We'll pop that into there. Okay. So we've got those. And let's just add some of these spiky bits in just as we can into that clay, or not as the case may be. Pop that into there. You could add art stones if you choose to do so. Those would work quite nicely. There we are. Oh, come on, be nice. Be nice. We'll add little bits in. And then you can just carry on adding as many pieces, extras, as you want, really. There isn't a right, there isn't a wrong. There we are. So we have our back of our house, our little hidden house. And we have our little meese in place in the front. So that is now going to get pulled out. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, if there are any of you watching, yeah, I am going to do it now before I finish to show you what I mean. I don't like this transition. That's my personal preference and personal feeling. So I'm just going to add in and I can then add a little bow onto there when I want to. There we go. Get rid of that white border. There we are. There. So we have our mice in their Easter egg decorated front and back. And thank you, Isabella, for liking my make this evening. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is my completed piece for tonight. I just now need to move that to dry. I am next live on Wednesday, the 18th of March, with and that will also be an Easter themed project, but very different to this one. So I do hope that you will tune in to watch what I get up to then. So take care, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you online soon. Bye.